And we kind of see this a little bit with andropause. So andropause is men's menopause. For men, their testosterone decreases pretty regularly. It looks pretty linear over time, where you'll see that decrease. But then when you see women's hormones and that going through menopause, it is like a hurricane. It's crazy how complex it is. Where you'll have progesterone skyrocketing and estrogen going who knows where the next day, and the testosterone dropping, and like that switching almost on an hourly basis. And you see this through the symptoms. So there's 48 plus symptoms of menopause. I would argue that there's many, many more, because all of these hormones control every organ of the body. They control our bone strength. They control our heart health. They control our mind. They are the operating system of the body. And during menopause, they're learning a new operating system. And that transition is extremely rocky for many of these women. After menopause, their hormonal day-to-day looks a lot more like a man because it's flatlined.
Welcome to the Curiosity Podcast, where we go deep on a wide variety of technical topics with the smartest leaders in the world. I'm Imamd and Raj. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mercury.
I'm Raj Suri. I'm the co-founder of Lima, Presto, and Lyft. And today we're talking to Loewen Cavill, who is the co-founder and CEO of Amira. This is an innovative company that helps women manage their menopause symptoms. They use a wearable that women use while they sleep that helps reduce hot flashes, connects to a mattress that helps cool them down while they're getting these hot flashes, and helps them get better sleep. She's invented this system, has a background in nuclear fusion, Google X. Imad, what are you interested in to talk to Loewen about today?
Menopause is not something that I know a lot about. My mom actually had a pretty difficult menopause. I remember being a kid and going, what the hell's going on? I think it's really cool to see kind of people go after these kind of practical problems. And although it sounds complicated, it is hardware and it is kind of medical. Yeah, I think it's actually a pretty obvious solution that, try to detect the hot flash and cool people down so that they can get better sleep. And I think those type of kind of improvements are going to really help a lot of people. So that got me pretty interested in this kind of conversation. How about you, Raj?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a subject I know almost nothing about. I actually haven't experienced, I think, menopause myself in my family. I'm sure my family hasn't experienced it. My mom experienced it, but it wasn't, I think a big deal in my family. So, but it's obviously a big deal to every woman going through it. And it's not something that is talked about that much. It's certainly not something that I don't think I've ever heard a woman kind of talk about it, in the workplace and say, hey, I'm going through menopause and this is something, you should be aware of. It's not something that, but it obviously has a big impact to women. This company is solving a problem around that, or one of the major symptoms, which is hot flashes. And I'm just curious to learn a lot more about menopause and its effects and the technology that can help reduce the symptoms or make it a little bit easier. Excited to talk to Loewen. And with that, let's welcome her. Welcome to Loewen Cavill.
All right. Welcome, Loewen, to the podcast.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, give us a quick history and tell us more about what Amira does.
Yeah, so Amira was started about 1.5 years ago. Amira is never something that I planned to do, never planned to be working in menopause, and I can get more in my background after. But Amira is about unlocking women's potential through technology, starting with menopause in the demographic that is most underaddressed. What we do is we predict symptoms and then we preemptively counteract those, starting with hot flashes and then moving into hormones into the future.
We'd love to understand why you started the company. What motivated you to do this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think zooming back, I was a kid obsessed with mathematics and the potential that technology can have in unlocking human potential. And I was obsessed with human potential and being at that maximally through athletics in college. So this is something that I was always a little bit, especially tuned into or obsessed with. And then I saw my aunt go through menopause. And this was the biggest dumpster fire, train wreck. maze that I had seen. And then, like in college, I'd seen this world of autonomy where you have all this autonomous robots, autonomous drones, autonomous delivery of all things. But then you see one of these women go through menopause and you see how bad the state of the art is. And you know our technology is better than that. You know our engineers are better than that. But the problem is like, how many engineers are working on aging women's health today? And it's actually very, very few. And menopause has one of the highest rates of aging in any other time period. We have this like huge obsession with longevity, but less so kind of like strategically going after it. I think that menopause is the clear low-hanging fruit when it comes to unlocking human potential. And if we bring more engineers to this space, I think there's a much, much higher reward when it comes to engineering effort put in to output or unlock of that potential.
So from my understanding, there's like a wearable you put on your wrist, and then there's like a mattress cover or something that like adjusts the temperature. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so we kind of believe in this like 2.0 of wearables, getting past the wearables that tell you the next morning, hey, you slept bad, or you woke up this many times. And I think the 2.0 is really wearables that respond to you in real time so that you don't have to. You don't have to lift a finger. You don't have to think about it. There's no guesswork. So what we do is we predict sleep disruptions and then preemptively counteract that through thermoregulation. So we predict a hot flash and then cool the bed down through like a cooling pad on top of the bed. And then that can actually counteract sleep disruptions from hot flashes.
Well, that's cool. How do you predict it?
So most people would guess we do temperature. We tried every temperature sensor out there. Then we tried like infrared lasers through the ear to get at core body. None of those worked. No existing wearables worked. So what we ended up doing is we ended up modifying some sensors from brain-computer interfaces using dry electrodes to detect the bioimpedance of the skin. This is kind of, I think, a really underexplored area of science, and it's really popping up right now, is bioelectricity. So figuring out how our biology interfaces with electricity. And that's kind of what we do. We send micro amounts of electricity into the skin, and you can see any like micro pore changes or moisture that pops up earlier than you would be able to see any temperature changes.
Oh, interesting. So the idea is someone starts sweating a little bit, that changes the resistivity on the electricity, and that's a good enough predictor to like preemptively try to like cool the person down.
Yeah, and the brain actually works quite quick at like starting to regulate, and hot flashes start in the brain. So unlike the external environment being really hot, the hot flash is triggered inside the mind. And that's where you see some of these like really fast response from the skin itself.
So the body thinks it's hot even before it's hot because that's what's causing the heat?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's all from hormonal imbalances that start to trigger some of these.
I guess why not go after the hormonal imbalances directly? Why go after this is like more of a symptom?
That's 2.0. So one thing that I learned, I used to work at Commonwealth Fusion Systems. They're a nuclear fusion startup that recently raised like $2 billion. They did a phenomenal job of acknowledging hardware is hard. And to accomplish some of these like moonshot hardware goals, you have to break it down into small pieces. Since if you've ever debugged like a robotic system, you don't know if it's the wires, you don't know if it's the hardware itself, you don't know if it's the software behind it. So what we've done is we've kind of like broken out our Amira strategy into these like discrete stepping stones that each can be economically viable in their own right. So our first step is measuring the bioimpedance, like the amounts of sweat. And then 2.0 of that is this new blossoming field where we start to monitor what's inside the sweat itself. And through measuring what's inside the sweat, you can pick up not just hormones, but metabolics, proteins, concentrations of nutrients, heavy metals. So that's where we plan to go into after. But that is very much like a moonshot technological approach that is best done if you've already kind of de-risked the steps before.
Can you explain the concept of bioelectricity?
Yeah, so bioelectricity is this field that's changed pretty dramatically in the last couple of years. So this is founded by, not necessarily founded, but really pushed forward by Michael Levin and Nick Lane. I think these are two scientists that are very much quickly on the rise for bringing this new concept of electricity actually has a huge importance in our biological workings inside. It is what transmit things in and out of the cell. It's what differentiates cell in the first place. So electricity, turns out, is a huge part of our interworkings. And we're now starting to look at our body from almost like an electrical circuit and how that might work. I first learned about this when I took this biological circuit design class. And then you realize that there are these overlaps in areas that you wouldn't expect as much. And I think every time that you apply a new lens of science, where let's have electrical engineers look at the body, I think that there's huge breakthroughs that come from that new emergence. And we're starting to see that in this new field of bioelectricity, where there's all these breakthroughs that come from seeing how electricity and biology are intertwined. And that's very, very core to the essence of Amira, is we are built on bioelectricity. That's what our technology is betting on. And we're lucky that some scientists are pushing this field forward in front of us.
Sounds good. And how many of these are out there, these mattresses?
Yeah, so we just kicked up our factory in China. My CTO is moving there to live on the ground floor of the factory next week. So we've had about 50 women use our product today, but the next stage of that is making a bunch more units so that it can expand beyond those 50 and go wherever those women are.
Sounds good. And how long have they been using it? What have the results been for the 50?
Yeah, we've had one woman that's used it about 200 nights. I would say that we've learned that it's quite difficult when you only have so few units to be able to make testers happy, because you give it to them and they're like, I'm able to sleep for the first time and I don't know how long, and now you're taking it away. So that's been a little bit unfortunate, but also very rewarding to see how much it changes their sleep. And I think we realized that in recent years, through people like Matt Walker talking about why we sleep is the cornerstone of all things. So not is it just they feel more energized the next day, but they're able to be far more productive. A lot of their mood swings are gone. Their weight fluctuations are more in check. They're able to go to the gym again, able to be their full selves in all these different aspects of life. So that's something that we've seen a lot of excitement around, is not just the sleep itself, but all the byproducts of that.
Got it. So you said, you were taking some units away from folks. Is it you have less than 50 units out there? Is it you have
yeah.
How many do you have out there?
Right now we have about 10 units that we're rotating between women. We had one woman in Alaska who was having about 12 hot flashes a night. And what this means is for each hot flash that she would have, she would go run out and sit in a snowbank in the middle of the night to mitigate this hot flash. And once you bring something like this to those women, not only are they not running out into a snowbank 12 times a night, but they're able to just sleep entirely through it. So the step function shift that you get when you can eliminate some of those sleep disruptions is really, really large for those women.
Explain a hot flash to me, because I don't, I've never had one, or maybe I've never had one. Is it how hot do you get in a hot flash? Is there a temperature, actual change? It's like getting a fever?
Yeah, so there is a core body temperature change. The core body temperature change itself is 0.1 Celsius temperature increase in the body. So it's actually small from a biological perspective, but for women and men, there's no question what is going on. I've talked to many women about their first hot flash, and they're there was no doubt in my mind that this was a hot flash because it was so far from anything that I'd experienced before. So it feels like a raging fire in your core. Women become drenched within seconds of this hot flash starting. And it's just an overwhelming amount of heat. And it's not just found in menopause. It's found in other hormonal imbalances. So a lot of men with prostate cancer will have hormonal treatments that they'll have to go on or off during this time. And then they'll start experiencing hot flashes as well. My grandpa is experiencing hot flashes. I don't really know why, but hormonal imbalances start to pop up a lot more these days, especially as you age. So it's found in many demographic groups outside of just menopause.
And do people have it during the day as well, or is it just at night?
Yeah, so women have it during the day as well, but it's most prevalent between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. is what we find. And this is most inconvenient because that is when you're supposed to be getting your really restorative stages of sleep, such as REM and deep sleep. So if you can enable them to have those like full windows of sleep where it's like the 90 minutes that you have to get to REM sleep, that's where you start to get some of those huge benefits, reducing brain fog, reducing fatigue in the day, increasing mental clarity as well.
Got it. And before I turn over to you, what percentage of women have hot flashes during menopause? I'm guessing all women go through menopause, right? But how prevalent is this issue?
Yeah, so all women go through menopause. It starts much earlier than people realize. Most symptoms for women start around 45 or 47. And then about 80% of women will experience hot flashes. And one thing that people don't realize is how long this stage of life actually lasts. On average, menopause lasts 7.4 years, which means they will be having these symptoms for 7.4 years. And if you look at what is available for these women today, it's quite abysmal. And they have like the highest disposable income during this time. They're at the peak of their careers, right when they should be promoted to senior positions in boardrooms. But so many of them are having to dip out of the race. Somewhere between 1% and 10% of women are actually quitting their jobs due to menopause right now. And I think that if you bring back their sleep, this number is drastically reduced because they're able to stay in their careers. They are able to stay functioning at peak performance.
You mentioned you were at a fusion startup. Was that just before this?
So I was there right before I was at Google X. So I went from the nuclear fusion company, which was an incredible experience. And then I was building out a data prognostics team at Google X's drone delivery company right before Amira.
Yeah. I feel like fusion is like so kind of, I guess, future focused and like more scientific, whereas like what you're doing now is very practical and like kind of solving people's direct needs. Do you feel like people do too much on the kind of, oh, let's do this far future cool thing rather than like, hey, this is like a practical thing that we could like fix for humans? Like, how do you think about like the relative investment that like we make into each?
No, it's a really, really good question. And I had this like existential moment when I was working in nuclear fusion about like existential risks as a human civilization, and thinking about like, how can we increase the odds that humans are around 1,000 years into the future, 10,000 years into the future. And I think fusion is a really big part of that. But there's so many engineers working on that. I felt like I was kind of like a small drop in the ocean on like relative value that I could create. And then I looked at, 50% of the world's population at the peak of their careers and was shocked by how many of these women are having to dip out of their value add time to society due to menopause. I think that it is very, very critical that we have a balance of feminine and masculine in capitalism. Capitalism is kind of like the young toddler when it comes to like when you look in like the long term of society. And I think that one thing that we'll need for capitalism to really feed our population and be a longstanding entity is have some proponents of the we. And I think the feminine is a really good proponent of the we, and having women that are like in those decision-making rooms thinking about, oh, should we go to war? Should we blow each other up? Should we, be destructive? I think that women can sometimes be more of the bearers of like how we can protect our future offspring and like our future offspring's offspring. And that voice, I think, is really missed right now when it comes to those decision-making rooms in capitalism. And I think what is the biggest unlock that I can have? It's unlocking those women during this time period that they have the biggest value add to society.
What did you learn from communal fusion that you've applied at your kind of startup?
Yeah, I think it's really the like steps that you have to take. We saw in fusion with ITER where they went for like the full thing from the start. And the amount of money that has been dumped into that project is massive. And we've been working on that for like 30, 40 years. And I think this is what kind of in some ways gives fusion a bad rep. Because we're constantly saying, oh, fusion is just 10 years away. And then we've had this company that's like made so little progress over those like last 30, 40 years. And Commonwealth, what they've really changed is this sprint mentality across these different stepping stones. So starting with like one smaller magnet and then starting with like one smaller reactor where you can just get 2 above 1 for the first time. And then one larger reactor at the end where you get commercially viable energy. And I think by taking those small step zones and having the entire company aligned on those, you can really de-risk very risky technologies. And I think about our company and what's the really risky technology that we're going after, it's really being able to see into the internal fluids through sweat. Like that is a huge technological moonshot. If that, like, we no longer have to take blood tests. We'll no longer have to get blood draws and can instead see what's in the internal fluids of our sweat. But it's quite complex. So it's really important to break this up into bite-sized pieces. And I think Commonwealth has done a phenomenal job of that.
Has there been papers done on like what's in your sweat and what information you can get out of it? And like, what are the top 2 or 3 applications of like sweat information that you can think of?
Yeah, this is something that's changed pretty dramatically in just the last 6 months. I didn't expect the field to pick up as quickly or all of a sudden as it has. People are coming at it from different approaches. So one approach is cortisol, others are looking at caffeine. The earliest of days, so like a year ago, people were looking at like electrolytes in sweat. But I think once you start looking at things like cortisol, which are changing on a minute-by-minute basis, that enables you to have much higher control over yourselves. And think about our modern environments today and our modern jobs today, where you're having to jump into all these different contexts of being, where you're supposed to, hop on a sales call, then you're supposed to go to the gym, you're supposed to give a performance review to one of your employees. All of these require a very different version of you. And I think once we can read real time into our hormones and chemical signaling agents, that can give us a higher level of control where we can modulate that in real time for whatever we need to be in that next moment. So do we need to be more empathetic? Do we need to be more energized at the gym? Do we need to be super confident? All of that can be regulated externally if we can read into our body with precision.
I mean, let's say you had a perfect measure of someone's cortisol, like practically speaking, what would you do? Like you'd say, oh my God, your cortisol's spiking, like go chill out. Like, is that the kind of feedback you would be trying to give?
No, I'm not as much of a believer of like adding to people's to-do lists or adding stressors in their environment. I think telling them is one thing, but acting on it for them is where you get huge unlocks. So I think what we'll be doing in the future is we'll have this patch that has small molecules dosed into it, but you can control it in real time through like piezoelectric materials and pumps, where you can unlock a higher presence of small molecules into the skin in a different time, so that you can keep individuals at the optimal amount of cortisol or estrogen or caffeine or whatever is needed in that moment through this like external modulation.
You're saying like you would go like, oh, cortisol's spiking, that's
suboptimal right now. Yeah. So we're going to regulate it for them. Or maybe like, hey, they have this thing where they like need to be really energized for, and they're kind of low cortisol right now. So we might like pump up some of the caffeine or something so that they're kept at that optimal threshold. And I think that where we unlock like next levels of productivity is when you're able to like switch into these different environments or these different ways of being at a much faster rate.
That's interesting. I would have thought you'd want to like try to get people to change the environment that like gets them to optimal performance rather than regulate them. But maybe there's a combo of both.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of like environmental changes that you can do. Like our starting product is, changing something in their environment, like changing the temperature of their bed. And there's versions of that you can do in the environment. But where I am really excited to go in the long run is getting into like changing some of your biology as well.
Do you try to do the science itself in the sense like even for your kind of normal device, you're like measuring the impedance of the skin? Was that science that someone else did and you just, you took their paper or whatever and you were like, okay, I'm going to try to turn this into a product? Or did you have to do kind of this original science to like figure out like what was the exact kind of measurement and how to do it?
It was a little bit of both. So there are big hot flash measuring devices found in laboratories today. And what we did is we like drastically miniaturized this and kind of modified some of the sensors to be able to detect this. But I would not say we invented a new entire modality of sensing. And this was like something that's always a little bit of a tug and pull when you have very technologically inspired individuals. And would say a lot of our team is of that orientation, where the first choice is not to go off the shelf, but some of the highest impact is found off the shelf. And that ramp up from having something that works, one time to working reliably all the time for like tens of thousands of individuals is a huge ramp up. And dedicating teams to do that ramp up, it's most efficient to go a little bit more off the shelf than inventing it from the start. And then like our next stage of this, it depends where the scientific field goes, but we're seeing a lot of progress in some of these labs, such as Caltech, on some of the sweat sensing technologies. And some of this will be made available to the public. Some of them will be invented in companies. It's too early to tell exactly how off the shelf we can be, but I think that some more invention will have to occur.
So what products kind of inspire you in this space, like women's health products? Again, this is another space I'm too familiar with. Like what are the most successful products in this space that are tech enabled?
I think one of my favorite companies of all time is definitely Medtronics. I think they kind of founded this space on how we can bring in physical crutches to our body and then like unlock full potential that way, in a way that like really prolongs lives. And I think every person at that company truly knows that they are doing good for humanity. There's like no question about that.
What does that company do? Sorry.
So they make medical devices. They're a rather old company now, but they were kind of the founding of the medical device space. Started in a garage in Minnesota. Don't quote me on this, but like 40 years ago, maybe 50 years ago. But I think that's just
It's a $113 billion company in terms of market cap.
I think that's a very beautiful, elegant company.
Oh, what are the products?
They've done like the pacemaker, enabling people with like heart palpitations. They've done a lot of those innovations. So anything that like goes inside of the body or regulates the body externally, pretty much they've done.
Pacemaker sounds pretty important. Yeah, that's a good one.
And then when I look at the menopause space specifically, there's been a pendulum shift. So previously, all women were on hormone replacement therapy. That was the default. Every woman, when she got into her mid-40s, the doctor would prescribe some sort of estrogen and progesterone replacement because the ovaries stop producing those after the years that a child is being produced. And then this like horrible study came out. It was like so misdone. It was like leaked early before the results were out. And then all doctors stopped prescribing it. Women were scared of it. And women today are still scared of it. I believe less than 4% of women in the US are on some sort of hormone replacement therapy for menopause. This is changing though. We've had a lot of companies pop up recently that are starting to kind of like change the conversation around hormone replacement therapy and different medicines that women can go on during this stage of life. MIDI is an example. They just raised a 60 million Series B, I would say. I think it was a Series B. And I think that they are really bringing so many women back to their full selves, which I think is very, very exciting.
What's the name of the MIDI, you said?
MIDI? Yeah.
And what do they do? What's their product?
They're essentially a telehealth clinic. And one of their primary offerings from this telehealth clinic is hormone replacement therapy. Hormones are so critical to the operating system of our body. Some would argue that the only longevity drug that's actually been discovered is hormone replacement therapy for menopause. But it's not really branded that way, so it's less popular in the Silicon Valley communities.
Why did HRT get a bad rap? Was it linked to cancer or something?
Yeah, there was this horrible study done in like the 90s where it linked it to breast cancer. And then if you look into the statistical significance of this study or how this study was run, it was all done wrong. Like they were prescribing hormone replacement therapy far too late where there's actually a risk. But once you bring women on to hormone replacement therapy, as their hormones are starting to decline, it's very, very safe and can reduce many of the chronic conditions such as heart disease or osteoporosis. was very bad PR stunt.
It would be interesting to hear, like, what are your thoughts on, like, just the future of women's health products and healthcare? What would you like to see, 10 years from now in terms of products available to women? And how do we get there?
I think women's health is such a fascinating engineering problem. Because when you look at the complexity around all these hormones orchestrating themselves and like constantly changing environments and like changing by the day, changing by the hour, I think you get a level of complexity that we don't know how to respond to quite yet. And women were actually kept out of studies until the 90s because of this complexity. They're like, it enters too much noise. We don't know how to deal with this. So we're just going to exclude it. So now we actually have no women's health data because it's been excluded for hundreds of years before. So I think that we are seeing kind of like the dawn of women's health by first enabling women to be in studies where they're testing different drugs or observing how heart disease manifests. So that's step one, is getting the data to act. And then I think we have this huge unlock where you can act on that data, and there's many different medical devices that could come into place there, different medications, different lifestyle interventions. So I think that's one huge thing that we'll see after some more of this data comes in, unlocks around women's health. And I think that for whatever reason, women's health is viewed as niche still. But if you look at where the dollars are actually spent, 80% of healthcare dollars are controlled by women. And I think we're starting to see a lot of these like front companies come out and like reap massive financial rewards. And I think now that we have some of these players that show, hey, there's money here, it's worthwhile to invest in this space, I think that we'll see a really, really big unlock in the companies that come out. And a lot more technical companies will hopefully come out. I think in early days, it's been a lot of like branding differently or talking differently around women's health, which is important. But I think we'll see a lot more like deep tech, heavy engineering companies come into this, because what people don't realize is actually really technically complex. Like, I thought nuclear fusion was complex, and then I saw the endocrine system and how it changes in menopause, and I was pretty blown away by the level of complexity there. And I think what we really need is more technologists in this space to make some of these breakthroughs.
Is there like some kind of like metric or quantification of how much more complex a woman's endocrine system or hormonal system is, versus a man's? I'm curious, because it's like, it seems like it should be much more complex, but I don't know how much more.
Yeah, I can show you some charts on this. And we kind of see this a little bit with andropause. So andropause is men's menopause. For men, their testosterone decreases pretty regularly. It looks pretty linear over time. We'll see that decrease. But then when you see women's hormones and that going through menopause, it is like a hurricane. It's crazy how complex it is. Where you'll have progesterone skyrocketing and estrogen going who knows where the next day, and the testosterone dropping, and like that switching almost on an hourly basis. And you see this through the symptoms. So there's 48 plus symptoms of menopause. I would argue that there's many, many more, because all of these hormones control every organ of the body. They control our bone strength. They control our heart health. They control our mind. They are the operating system of the body. And during menopause, they're learning a new operating system. And that transition is extremely rocky for many of these women. After menopause, their hormonal day-to-day looks a lot more like a man because it's flatlined. And then before, it changes on like a monthly cadence. And then that in between, it's everything in between. From a perspective where you get a ton of learnings on what hormonal imbalance even is, how it shows up, what happens when you have these crazy assortments of hormones. So I think that where you can learn the most about the operating system of the body from a hormonal perspective, it's during menopause, because you see it at that edge case.
Fascinating. Thanks. And over to you, Imamd.
Is the U.S. kind of healthcare system good at being helpful with these things? Like, I mean, just to take your product, would they pay for a product like this, or is like kind of making your sleep better something that's like completely outside like what health insurance companies care about?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the system is very much a antiquated older system where the incentives aren't always aligned for innovative change. Right now, a lot of the medical billing codes still don't quite see sleep as the cornerstone in health, even though a lot of our recent scientific understanding has validated that as the case. And same with menopause. Menopause has not been historically acknowledged as a medical condition due to its taboo nature and lack of conversation. I think we're starting to see this change really, really quickly. But from a business building perspective, I think that kind of the flip side of the coin is the regulatory looseness that you have in menopause. And I think businesses can actually move much, much faster in these new spaces that haven't been super regulated historically. So we are kind of seeing this menopause gold rush kick off right now due to some of those missing regulations. Which as a woman, I'm hey, we should have some more of those. That's a good idea sometimes. But from a business building perspective, it enables you to go faster.
Is there a downside to not having regulation? Are there people out there that are making promises that are not true?
For example, how I originally got into the space is my aunt, she was waking up from hot flashes about 5 times a night. This sleep loss and sleep deprivation extended on for a period of 4 years to the point of where she was getting sick all the time. You could so visibly know that she was not herself anymore. But meanwhile, I had no idea she was going through menopause because menopause is taboo. And she ended up having to quit her job. It was this whole thing. And she'd spend hours each week searching for solutions that might help her, buying everything she could off the internet, going to every doctor she could possibly find, going to these naturopaths and even witch doctors, everything that she could do because she was so desperate to get better. And then one of the things that she tried in the do-it-yourself approach, since the healthcare infrastructure and medical community was so unhelpful during the stage of life, actually sent her to the hospital with side effects. So I saw this happen in my aunt is the lack of regulation and the lack of support or educated expert support that women have during this stage of life. And when you look at, you were kind of asking about our healthcare system today and how our healthcare system is set up for something like this or is not set up for something like this. Right now, less than 20% of OBGYNs have any training in menopause. Menopause is a stage of life that lasts for 10 years, 7.5 years, and is insanely complex. So if no doctors have any training on it, then they're not able to give any support. And if you look at what it takes to change how doctors are educated, it's very, very difficult. The incentives are not aligned. It would mean that someone from the heart disease department would have to give up, hours of their lectures. And that becomes a very bureaucratic ego battle that I don't see changing anytime soon.
I guess if you could control either health insurance companies or the law, what would you change that you think would make it more helpful to people going through menopause?
Definitely the insurers. I would have a lot more billing codes that would enable women to get treatment for this. And I think there would be a huge payback for insurance companies to this as well. Because the number of women that are getting CT scans during this time because they think that they have Alzheimer's or dementia, or the women that are getting rushed to the ER because they think they're dying when it's just a regular symptom of menopause is actually quite high. There's a huge amount of added medical costs during this stage of life. And then additionally, so many chronic conditions come in the long run if menopause is not treated properly. I was looking at this one study where it was talking about women with nighttime hot flashes versus women with just daytime hot flashes. And women that were regularly waking up from these nighttime hot flashes had a huge risk of diabetes later on. It was drastically skyrocketed by the women that didn't have those constant awakenings. And it's frustrating for insurance companies to acknowledge the simplicity of sleep sometimes and the simplicity of some of these easy menopause treatments, but it would save them so much money in the long run if those were funded.
Yeah, I just read this book called Outlive. Raj actually read it too. And I think it talks about a link between menopause and dementia. People who had HRT and better menopause treatment had a lower risk of dementia, which I thought was kind of a interesting link that I would not have expected.
Yeah, if we looked at it purely from an engineering perspective, we took a step back and looked at long-term health outcomes, we would save so much money, bring so many more years, have so much more productive output to society if we were better about treating menopause.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's hard to fix the US health system, though.
Turns out it's a little nuanced.
So right now, people are just paying for Amira out of pocket.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're actually seeing a lot of these healthcare innovations is in some of these self-pay models. We're seeing these like health tech companies pop up and get a lot more traction because individuals know their problems and that their problems are not being solved by existing healthcare systems. And I just read this stat that like less than 50% of women in our demographic have primary care providers anymore because they're not being served by that. And I think that the incentives of our healthcare system don't have our doctors spending as much time with us as we need, or don't have them evaluating the full plethora of data that they could get. But some of these health tech models do. They are able to take more of a full suite of data. They're able to like give you a view of your health and how to solve it in a way that our current medical system doesn't have the time for. And their like incentives are not aligned for that data-driven, more time-consuming care.
Why is menopause a taboo topic? I had no idea that it was a taboo topic.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And like the proof of it being taboo is like, how many times in the last month have you talked about menopause? Like I looked at my career and I'd never learned anything about menopause. And I would think that I'm a relatively well-educated woman. But right now, society loves the young, fertile women and kind of casts aside the unfertile menopausal women. And those women don't feel enabled to talk about this hardship, don't feel enabled to talk like, hey, yes, I'm in this like state of aging. So right now, those women are a little bit silenced and aren't welcome to talk about these issues. And I would say that if menopause wasn't taboo, we'd be hearing about menopause on like, a daily basis because so many women are experiencing it with such levels of intensity.
Curious, where you want to go with the business. What's your goal? Is it how do you plan to make it available to women going through menopause? It's kind of an interesting. You have this trial that you've done, and now you're looking to make it generally available. Is it going to be just available on your website, or to buy, or how are you planning to sell it?
Yeah, so us engineers try to do go-to-marketing from a very engineering perspective, since traditional marketing was not a wheelhouse. So what we ended up making is kind of like an AI doctor, or a menopause coach is what we call it. And this is actually really picked up in a way that I didn't totally expect to see the usage for so many different types of women, for having someone that like regularly checks in on their health and like regularly is there alongside them to help them make these commitments to their health or help them follow through that. That's been quite interesting. Like we had one woman yesterday talk about how Amy's our like AI menopause coach. She told Amy like, hey, thank you so much for being here with me during this stage of life. Like my mom was always the one that I'd come to about these areas of health that I feel like I couldn't go elsewhere, but she's gone now. So you really stepped in and replaced some of that like spots that were missing due to my like dead mother. So there's huge, I think, opportunity in this space because one, we see a massive gap in menopausal care. There's like 1,500 menopause providers globally with 1 billion women in the world experiencing menopause. I think that type of gap is not solved by like training more doctors. I mean, like that'd be awesome if we had more menopause doctors, but I think that's like a really long, difficult bureaucratic process to push forward. But AI has the opportunity to like scale that vacuum and being able to expand expert medical care. And
you're saying that like someone is getting an AI doctor from you, like a woman experiencing menopause. Like how do they like access this AI doctor?
Yeah, so it's called an AI menopause coach. So one thing that we're starting to see in some of this more concierge medicine is where doctors aren't just available in like the waiting room or in the doctor's office, but they're actually available by text. So this is something that we saw picking up, is like really enjoying that like text-based access. So then we actually created a LLM menopause coach that is available through text, like many of those concierge doctors. And what women love about this is like when they're up at 4 a.m. and they can't sleep because of their menopause, this menopause coach, Amy, responds instantly and is like by their side, answering all their questions. And we even have menopause doctors using Amy because like they haven't got this education. Menopause is so complex. They don't know the answers all the time. So for more edge cases, we see doctors using this to help give better treatment to their patients.
So this is something that's live right now? Like Amy exists, anybody can text a number and talk to Amy?
Yeah. It's live right now. We launched this in October and have been pretty surprised by some of that traction there. And then this is something that like from a go-to-market perspective, as a woman builds a relationship with Amy, like I was checking some of our numbers yesterday. We've had one woman that sent 1,024 messages with our menopause coach. And once you have that level of trust, when Amy becomes their friend, that's when they like really buy into anything that Amy vouches will be helpful to their health, such as our Terra wearable system.
Got it. So your go-to-market is make Amy popular, and then Amy will recommend the Terra system to them. And so there's like a, conversion funnel there. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Amy's a pretty easy sell, and it's like an educational tool that I think fits into like popular narrative on democratizing some expert care that isn't being found elsewhere. I think this is something that we could monetize, but I think it actually better serves us in the long run to make that for free now.
You're dropping Amy on us in the last 5 minutes there, Loewen. How did you train up Amy? Like, is it just off the shelf LLM, or did you have to train it a lot to this data?
I mean, initially it was off the shelf LLMs, but there's so much extra work that you have to do to not accidentally give medical like care that only a doctor is allowed to give. And so there was like a lot of like guardrails set in place, a lot of like fine tuning how an individual speaks to Amy and how Amy responds. Once you're getting into this kind of like doctor companion model, there's a lot of psychological questions that pop up. And I think once you kind of like fit into the lower levels of human psychology, you're able to have huge unlocks from a capitalistic perspective.
Wait, so what is a question that Amy can answer that's not medical? Like if someone says, "Hey, I just had a hot flash, like, can you give me kind of 3 things I could do to try to like reduce it?" Is that something it could answer, or would that be considered like medical?
Yes, it can answer that, and it can tell women that the pathways can include hormone replacement therapy and other drugs, but Amy does not prescribe drugs or tell women to take drugs. They say that this is an option, give some education on that, and then we recommend that they go talk to their doctor about that. And one thing that we see a huge usage when it comes to Amy is like helping prepare women for that conversation with their doctor. I would actually argue that like, how can we train more doctors? It's easier to train more doctors through giving women the tools to understand their health, because then they can go to their doctor and they're like, I know these are the options. This is how it works. This is what I want. And makes that interaction much, much more efficient, beneficial for the women and also beneficial for the doctor. But, changing the medical education that they got 30 years ago, that's actually much more difficult.
Hallucinations a problem? Like, is there like sometimes advice way off?
We built this like eval system. So that's something that we like evaluate for and like simulate and check our models against are there any hallucinations? In early days, there was some hallucinations around recommending our Terra system, would like sometimes like make up what our Terra system is. And we're like, no, Amy, that's not it. But we've trained her, and now there's like very, very few, if any.
Is this like an open source LLM? Like, what are you using and how are you fine tuning it?
Yeah, so initially we are on ChatGPT using OpenAI's models, since we're seeing so many of the earliest advancements there. But now the open source model community is like really, really popping up here. I mean, Google actually just open sourced some of their models today, making it much more cost affordable for individuals and like small companies to use some of these off the shelf models. So we're migrating off of OpenAI right now because some of these alternative options, you can get it for like much cheaper, faster, with like relatively similar performance.
This has been great. Thank you, Loewen. I really enjoyed this chat.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for taking the time, you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Loewen. This was really interesting. I feel much better educated. So I have a wife and 2 girls, so I guess I will point them to this podcast if this happens.
Thanks, Loewen. Really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, well, great chatting with you both.
Well, that was a really interesting chat. Raj really came in not knowing much about menopause. He was like, what is menopause? And honestly, I didn't know that much either. I had no idea that it lasts for so long, like 7 years, right? 7.5 years.
7.4.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know how intense it is throughout the 7.4 years, or and what the standard deviation is. That's one question I'm still wondering about. Is there like a peak in a few months, or is there like a long peak over 7.4 years experiencing the same symptoms? I think that's something that would be interesting to dig into. But yeah, it was interesting. I learned a lot about women's health. I think one thing Loewen mentioned, women's health is a serious topic, big topic, and women do go through these massive hormonal changes. It's pretty clear that it's way more intense than men, and we probably could use a lot more solutions around that. So I think just fascinating to learn about a serious topic that affects half the population.
In a previous episode, you were a little skeptical of hardware startups. Do you think this one is a little better because, like, presumably a higher pain point, higher price point that these people would pay, or do you think still like pretty hard to get like a hardware startup working in this field?
Yeah, consumer hardware is like the hardest of the hard categories. There's such a large graveyard of companies in this space. Think about all like the sleep tracking companies and like all these various IoT companies and device companies. Very few of them make it to the promised land, and that doesn't mean people shouldn't try, but you got to know. I mean, remember companies like Jawbone, and there was there was a camera tracking company that to help make camera focus better. It's just very hard, and the Pebble, the smartwatch company, like these guys. You can do almost everything right, but if you get one detail wrong, your company can die, and that's the problem with hardware.
I mean, I think the interesting thing is, medical devices is a huge market, right? Medtronic is a multi-$100 billion, more than $100 billion company. I think the tricky part is actually getting access to those medical insurance revenue streams. There's a lot of money in it, but I don't know how many people are wealthy enough and are willing to go above, they're already paying health insurance. Are they also going to pay more for their healthcare? I think that part is tricky. If they could get medical insurance companies to kind of underwrite this and have a billing code, I think it would be a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think the benefit also of being integrated into like the system, the health insurance system, is that it solves a marketing problem, which is a huge problem and major
doctors
cost,
can promote
right?
it.
Yeah, and I think crossing that chasm is going to be critical for this company, Amira, to succeed, is like just getting doctors to talk about it, which, I think one of my concerns would be like, is this solving the problem in a direct enough way that, like, is this even going to come up in a medical conversation with the doctor? That you could try this product in sleep. I'm not sure. It may not. And so, because it's not a serious medical condition or a serious medical thing that is happening here. It's obviously uncomfortable, but it's not like life-threatening or massively debilitating.
I mean, ideally, it would be kind of word of mouth and viral. Like women probably know each other that are going through menopause. So the question of like how taboo is like an interesting question, like a societal kind of question. And I do think it's like actually a surprisingly taboo topic. Like heart conditions are not a taboo topic, even though lots of people go through them and people talk about it, but yeah, it's very rare to hear women talk about menopause or like it to show up in a TV show or something like that.
Yeah, or maybe they just don't talk about it publicly and they only talk about it with each other. I guess you and I would never know, but it's
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, you would hope they would talk about it, and it would be an accepted topic that people should talk about, including, by the way, I think periods. I think like a woman don't talk about periods in general. Like some women have very bad periods; they don't show up to work, and that should be okay. I mean, it's that's just a part of life. And like if you can't show up to work because you have a period, I don't think I've ever heard a woman say that, but I do know that women have serious periods, right? And so that's another thing.
I mean, you might be a cool CEO that's okay with that, but I think there's a fear, and probably rightly so, that like a woman would feel like she's not going to be treated as an equal if she's complaining about health conditions and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's wrong though.
Yeah, it is wrong. One thing that I really liked about kind of this idea, it's so obvious in some ways, right? Like I've heard of hot flashes. I didn't know how severe the symptom was, but it feels like for something that affects so many people, we have like other companies that are doing like mattress cooling just because people don't like being hot at night, right? Like it seems so obvious to like try to actually like build this for like a pretty severe medical condition. So often in startups you think like the obvious things have been done, and then you hear an idea and you're like, wow, this is like an obvious thing that should exist. Doesn't mean it'll be successful in it, but often I find that the obvious ideas are like the big ones.
Yeah, it is obvious, you're right. And I think the key is getting to a scale that keeps the company interesting to both Loewen and her investors, and not dying along the way, right? So it's that's going to be the key. It's great to see entrepreneurs trying to solve this problem, and I think Loewen, is right about many things, and that women's health is very important, and we do women are going to be at a very productive phase in their career during menopause, and having them go through this is highly problematic from a society and productivity perspective. So we should, as a society, want to solve this problem, or like make this transition easier.
Yeah, 100%. With that, I think we can end the podcast. Please subscribe and review us on whatever channel you're listening to us on. Thanks for joining as always.